first and grab some coffee.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny because my day is like starting to go towards an end, and yours is like just getting started.
Just starting, yeah.
Yeah, you're in the next day already.
Yeah, exactly. We knew about the election results before anyone else.
Yeah, you should have like told somebody, man.
Warned everyone.
You want to keep the edge. You want to keep like the suspense, I guess.
It's like the same way. We knew who won ADCC long before anyone else did. We were ready for it.
Yeah.
That's how Craig and Lachlan got so good.
Oh yeah, they were able to study early. Dying time zone. Anyway, Jeremy, what's going on, man? How you feeling today?
Yeah, good, man. I just moved into a new place today, so you know how it is, like sleeping in like an unfamiliar place, like.
Mm-hmm.
But it's cool. I spent a lot of yesterday at IKEA and assembling IKEA furniture.
Oh,
So that's how I'm doing.
You're a real grown up now. How old are you?
25.
25. Okay. How long have you been doing jiu-jitsu for?
It would have been just crossed into 9 years. I think just 9 days ago. I think I started training like right at the end of October in 2011. So it should have just crossed over into 9 years now.
Very interesting. That's a lot of time to be dedicated to something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a long time doing anything for sure. And it surprises me sometimes when I think about that. Like I started when I was 16, so it's been around for a good chunk of my life.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's what you spend most of your day doing.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Like 9 years is a long period of time. Like even when like you're starting out, like maybe you're going like a couple of times a week, or maybe when like you're really excited about starting jiu-jitsu, you're doing it a few times, like maybe like 5 or 6 times a week. But then it's different doing it full time because it's you're looking at being at the gym from like 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. like all day long.
Yeah, it almost becomes that career. And I think that a lot of people can think of it as like, oh, it's like this fun hobby that I do. But does that perspective change as you do it all day, every day?
Well, yes and no. It's funny when I started. So when I'd started and I was a white belt, like the Meows had just gotten their black belts, I believe, and I was really, really into the Meows. And so at an early stage, I was really romanticized with the idea of like pursuing jiu-jitsu full time, even if it's not like a financially rewarding career. Sorry.
It's all good, man.
Rolling through the background.
That stuff happens.
So I was really, really romanticized with that idea of like pursuing jiu-jitsu full time as a career. Whether it's going to be like financially viable or not was like another thing entirely. It was just like a fascinating idea of like dedicating yourself to something like that. So like as a white belt, I remember I think there was actually for me like a major shift mentally, like at a very, very early stage in jiu-jitsu, like because of the Meow brothers. There was like, because like with anyone that wants to try and get good at anything, like you're looking at trying to motivate yourself, and you're like, oh, like how are these guys able to do it? How do I like make sure I can put in that much effort? And it was with like looking at the Meows, and this where a lot of that inspiration came from, was that it's not about motivation, it's about discipline. And like, if you really want to get good at something, you don't need to, you can't be motivated, because motivation is waning. You need to be disciplined. So like at a really, really early stage. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I was just throwing in that you don't have to necessarily like feel amazing every single day to show up.
Exactly. Like, and you'll even see like John Danaher talk about that idea of like Kaizen. Like it's not about like making these big leaps and bounds every single day. It's about making sure that you're making consistent progress every single day. And like that accumulation is what makes a huge difference.
Nice.
Like, because when we're thinking about like 9 years of jiu-jitsu, do I want to have moments of greatness, or do I want to have 9 years of consistently working away at my skill sets nonstop?
I think that really separates somebody who can really put in a lot of time and effort into something, and somebody who is very fixated on becoming the champion. I think we've seen that a lot, just with any sport, with any endeavor. you get so obsessed with like, I want to win this title or I want to accomplish this, that you kind of forget about showing up, sometimes
Absolutely.
up to 9 hours a day. Now, I'm sure in that time when you're there, like 12 hours, you're also doing coaching, private lessons as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my before a lot of this COVID situation, so I was located down in Melbourne. Right now, I'm in Sydney. But yeah, like my regular schedule when I was in Melbourne was 4 days out of the week. I was at the gym from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So starting with like getting a little bit early, training a hard 9:30 session, our pro jiu-jitsu session. After that, I'd either be teaching private lessons, or I'd be teaching the midday class, in which case I would be like rolling in that one too. But yeah, and then that leads into more private lessons after that, and then training in the evening classes, and there'd be 2 classes in the evening that I jump in for. So the 9:30 session, the way that works is we're able to sort of tailor it to ourselves a lot more, and it's at a much higher intensity. While if I went and taught the midday classes and rolling in there, or even just going and attending the evening classes, that would be more an opportunity just to roll with blue belts and develop new skill sets.
Mm. So if I'm hearing this correctly, it's like towards the end is where the end of the day is where you get more of your intense training, and you'll save.
More the other way around. Having intense training in the morning, like start of the day, and then like start like looking at like building skill sets, like rolling lighter, little bit more like lower intensity towards the end of the day.
This is interesting. Okay. Do you
Yep.
find that that's something that just naturally worked for you? Did you ever experiment with how your schedule was in relation to training and keeping other things balanced?
So that's more the schedule that's like set in place based on like what Lachlan's put together. So the idea is like there is like a regular class structure in terms of we have like a 9:30 like pro jiu-jitsu training, and that's where like a lot of the serious guys will turn up to train hard, guys that are really focusing on competition.
Nice.
And so that's more something that Lachlan's put into place. And then a lot of the other classes, it's like like people that are just like your regular jiu-jitsu classes, and like I'll jump into those too, but I'll just probably more spend time drilling my own things, and also just rolling with like a large variety of people. While typically the 9:30 session, I'm rolling with a lot of the same people, but like rolling but a lot more intensely.
Okay. That 9:30 was more at night when you were
Oh no
rolling with
no
people, or
that
was it all in
9:30
the
a.m.
morning? Gotcha.
That's at
Okay.
9:30 a.m. Sorry, yeah,
Yeah. So you'll get your intense training in, and then you'll really start focusing on like the coaching and the instructing as well.
absolutely.
Now, with coaching, is that something that you also feel like a very powerful drive with, along with
Absolutely.
jujitsu?
So for me personally, I find competition is a good direction to sort of gear my skill sets, as well as I find it's a good way to test the things that I'm working on, because for me really jiu-jitsu is about the techniques. Like I'm fortunate that I get to train at Absolute MMA, because all of us are technique nerds. And so with that, that's why I like the coaching side of things, because it's like I get really really excited about jiu-jitsu techniques, and then like I want to show it to someone else, because it's like, oh, like maybe they'll be like excited about this too, or it'll have like a notable impact on the game. And to me, that's what jiu-jitsu is about. And I think competition is a good direction to gear those skill sets, as well as a good way to test them.
Yeah, you can see, you can really put the test what you've been working on. Because I think you could probably find yourself in quite a routine when you start going with the same people all the time. You start discovering what people's weak points are just almost naturally, right? And then when you go in and you go against some random person who's around your skill level, that's probably like the ultimate
Absolutely.
test there. So I want to
Absolutely.
definitely dive into like how your progression has been with each belt. One thing I do want to put out there is I actually, for myself, really got into jujitsu and started to really like, I would say like fall in love with it. Something that I would want to do for like a large portion of my time in the day would go to jujitsu. A lot of it's actually because of coaching. I was doing like personal training, fitness training, a large portion of my life, and one of the most satisfying things is like coaching and instructing people. And like the motivation to get good at jujitsu comes with wanting to teach other people good jujitsu, because there's like that mind blowing experience that you can really give somebody when you like fill a hole in their game that is just like
Absolutely.
unlike anything else. Is that something that resonates with you?
Absolutely. Like it's nice to see, like, like I'll show something to a lower belt, and like it's nice to see those moments where they just have like little fireworks sort of going off in their head, where they go, oh, I never thought of it that way. And that's really what got me into jiu-jitsu in the first place, where like, like early on, like maybe like we'd have like a seminar from like, say, someone like John Will, who's like one of the Dirty Dozen, and like he would show, just like a small technique, and he would talk about an idea surrounding it, and it would just it totally change your perspective on a certain situation or certain position. It's like blow like just like it blow my mind, and it really really got me excited about jiu-jitsu. And so like even for me now, like I'm still sort of chasing that little high that comes with with those discoveries. I think now though, like the longer you train, like those little discovery or those discoveries are probably less and less grand, in terms of like it's not like, like a fundamental idea from side control, for example. Like it's probably going to be more like a slight way of changing your grip, or something like that. But every now and then, like, something major comes up where it's a totally new position, but like still sort of chasing that little like technical high.
Yeah. Where do you think's the peak of that? Which like I guess we could call it belt level. I hear some people actually saying the belt could matter, the belt doesn't matter, and most of it is just through your experience, time training as well. I don't know if you're open to any thoughts on that. Do you think that
Sure.
that's something? Do you think it's still a very accurate way of like tracking progress or tracking skill level?
So I've had these discussions a few times, particularly more frequently, like across the course of this year, and even like just the other day, I was talking about it with a friend of mine, about the belt system. So I personally believe that the belt system is a fantastic way of showing progress and hierarchy within a gym. I think across different gyms, I think, the belt system, it doesn't really work. Like everyone talks about how like the belt system is inconsistent. Like, every gym has a different standard. I think the belt system's fantastic within a gym.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you start a white belt in a gym and you're working your way all the way through, like you have an idea of like, oh, this person's been training this long and he's this good because the coach is giving him this belt. Because in that case, for the most part, everyone's held to like a similar type of standard, and that's not even necessarily in the sense of like every purple belt is a similar skill set. It's just more the coach is looking for the same type of values when it comes to promotion. So I think within a gym, that's fantastic. Like within like absolute MMA, like the people, the belt system's pretty consistent. Like the way that Lachlan treats it at our gym is that, he looks for people that have, that similarly skilled to what he was at that belt, and he holds that pretty consistently.
Yeah, you can start to tell like when like a white belt's
Yeah.
getting close to that blue belt level, or like that purple belt's getting a little closer to that brown. You're like, okay, we can start feeling it right.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, like I think Lachlan does a really good job of making sure that people's attitudes are correct as well. Like he doesn't promote people. Like I can only think of one time where someone got promoted, like notably early, like to a different belt, and that was for a very very specific reason. But outside of that, like Lachlan typically doesn't give the belt much earlier than the 2 year mark for each belt, and I think that's just good to make sure that like people don't get like sort of inflated egos,
Oh yeah,
and think that their shit don't stink. Like
yeah. There's got to
yeah,
be a little bit of like a humility to it. I'm sure
absolutely.
there is a little bit of like an ego drive. I think not everybody, but particular people, especially as like they get their blue and purple. I can imagine they start to feel a
Absolutely.
little bit like, all right, well now I'm starting to be like one of the best in the room. Like especially if there's
Yeah,
like we all have that experience when we're in like our first 3 months and it's just like scary going in. But then
absolutely.
being on like the high end of like, yeah, I'm finally better than everybody in the room. I'm sure that can definitely inflate some people.
Oh, for sure. And I think on top of that as well, like people can want to get to another belt. Like they think I'm ready. And I think waiting can be its own test. Like Yeah, like I think like in this modern day as well, people don't they don't have the patience required for certain things. So I think it's good in that regard that it is such a long journey to get to black belt.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of patience to it. Just to tell you too, and to throw this out there, I've been a white belt for like almost 4 years, and I've been training consistently. I've had people when I train, like I regularly train with blue belts and do well. I'm with other white belts. I feel like I don't even relate to them, and I know that there was definitely like this moment of like discouragement of like why haven't I been promoted, but I think there's also, especially nowadays, I think with things changing so fast, you see a lot of people like almost gym hopping, where they find out that maybe somewhere near them is a little bit better than where they're training at, and then they switch. And then I'm sure from there, it probably becomes a little bit more difficult to like gauge where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. And for me as well, like when getting to train at different gyms pretty regularly just because of the nature of what I'm doing for work essentially. Um, and because I mainly train no-gi, like that sort of reinforced my thoughts about the belt system. Because when I bounce around at different gyms, like whatever belt level that someone tells me they are, or based on whatever like rank rash guard they might be wearing, I pretty much will throw that out the window immediately because like I just think, okay, well I'll just roll. Like when I roll them, I'll just take it like I'll just gauge it from there rather than sort of taking it at face value. What they say their belt is, because so many gyms are different and hold a different standard. Like there's times where I'll roll with a brown belt and it's like, wow, this guy is like feels world class. And there's times you roll with a brown belt and like you'll think like, okay, this guy feels more like a competitive blue belt. Like and sometimes not even that. And at the same time it can go the other way where like you go to roll with a blue belt and it like they really take you by surprise. Like you're expecting like, oh, okay, well, I just rolled with this brown belt like just then. That wasn't very good. Let's roll with this blue belt. He's probably not going to be very great either. And then like he surprises you, like cartwheels past your guard and like
and not to mention, some people just have a good day or a bad day.
For sure.
There are some people that are just. I'm sure you have those days where you're just like, I wish I could feel like this every day. You just feel
for sure. And then there's days where I'm like, is this worth it?
Yeah. You're like, did I pick the right career?
Yeah. No, I know the answer to that is 100% no. That's not even up for debate.
What broke that? What gave it the 100% no? Was it the long hours? Was it the injuries?
It's not like don't get me wrong. I really do enjoy jiu-jitsu. I think in terms of what it is as a career, it's just one of those things where it's compared to like a lot of other sports, it's not like the reward isn't like quite the same. But I do actually it's a in a very, very true sense a love-hate relationship with the sport. In the sense that like it's an obsessive pursuit,
Yeah, you're never gonna like learn all of jiu-jitsu. Plus, on top of that, it seems to draw a lot of like entrepreneurship as well, because you could have somebody who's like a world-class jiu-jitsu star making like absolutely nothing, and then you see somebody who is like just above average level, and they are like just rolling in money from like clothes, sponsorships, connections, and stuff. I'm trying to be that guy. No, I'm just kidding. But
hey, you can do that. Go for it. I'm not going to hold that against you.
Okay, great. No, so I definitely want to get now into like your journey thus far. So what belt are you up to now?
I'm a brown belt now.
Excellent.
I've been a brown belt for about 2 years.
Oh, excellent. Oh, it's exciting times, I'm sure. Any promotion day, it could be the day.
And that's the thing though, like we're talking about with the belt system. Actually, and a point on that is that I think the competition though, I'm not a big fan of the belt system for that very reason. I'd like to see either something like judo where it's a free for all, or maybe something like wrestling where you almost jockey for skill positions, or like skill divisions. I mean,
I like that.
It'd be interesting to see something like that. But then one of the things that really breaks it with jiu-jitsu is the super fights, because then you can have all these varying like skilled people like getting matched up with each other that like I can't imagine you'd ever see like a D1 and a D3 wrestler having like a wrestling super match with each other.
No.
Like that's just not a thing.
Each other's division.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and so that's where I think with jiu-jitsu it can kind of break a little bit, where you do really sometimes get like guys of quite varying skill sets matched up with each other. But then that also happens with the belt system, like for competition. And I think as well, like when we're talking about a world championship of jiu-jitsu, it seems kind of silly to have these different belt systems when I don't think you'd see that with many other sports.
Mm-hmm.
Like a world championship really is going to be a world championship in terms of everyone at your weight division you could be up against, or anyone at your weight division even.
Yeah, all
And at the
skill.
same time, yeah, and so I think that'd be good. Like maybe you could use the belts in. It wouldn't even really work there, but like some type of seeding. But and so what it does is like ideally like similar to ADCC is you'll typically see the best guys towards the end of the bracket because of the seeding, the same way you would in like tennis. But then it still gives a fantastic opportunity to someone that is of like a lower skill level to like really shock the world and make it through.
Mm-hmm. Even, and
Because
sometimes it could just take a good performance. Doesn't have to necessarily
yeah.
be first place.
Oh, for sure.
Life.
For sure. Like, and that's another thing that goes into competition is like you could be a certain belt level and like you could legitimately be at that skill level, but you just don't compete. Like some people just do not compete to their full capacity. And I mean, there's probably most people aren't competing to their full their full potential either. They're competing at part of it, but some guys just take a real nosedive when they go to compete, even if they're absolute monsters in the gym.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's a lot of it could be like a mindset thing. It could be a physical thing. It could be nerves, anxiety. It could be overconfidence. There are so many factors that goes into competing itself. Like sometimes you could think, oh my God, I'm going against this person and they're supposed to be this particular skill level. And now I don't know how I'm going to perform. And now your whole game's thrown out. And that's the worst to see, especially like a very aspiring competitor. I think that's the really important role of a coach to like help them stay in the logical side of things, right?
Sure.
As they approach.
Yeah, and the tough thing there is that you can tell someone something as many times as you need, but if they're in their own head, they're in their own head, and they need to learn to navigate that themselves. So for sure as a coach, like you need to make sure that you're saying the right things, like and tailor it to certain people's mindsets. Like I can think about like giving people feedback on matches, for example. I remember one competition, like the person will come off the mat and I'll let them know that they did like a good job, like this is what you did really, really, really well, and just leave it at that. And like there's other people a buddy of mine who was competing, he's an ex-cop, like different sort of mindset. Like he came off the mat, he'd lost his match, and I was like, this was really good. Like this match started really well at this point, but man, when you got to this bit, that was terrible. Like we need to work on that.
Mm-hmm.
And like different people, you need
kind of blunt about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like different people, you need to talk to them differently. And I think as a coach, like it's good to be able to have that, like to be able to perceive that. Just because like different people, like even though you could say the same thing to two people, they receive it in totally different ways. Like one of them like will just like you can be very frank with them and say like, man, like that was just like that was shit. And like for most people, that's probably not the way to talk to them, but like that like certain people, like say for example my buddy, like who was an ex-cop, like he's used to be people being like frank with him like that, and like that probably helps him take that information on board a little bit better. Because if you're being too nice about it, like maybe like they don't take it on board. While some people it's like the slight like the smallest inkling of negativity, they really resonate with that.
Yeah. And sometimes you say one thing like that was bad, and then it just sticks in their head, and they think I'm bad.
Exactly, and that's.
Then you have some people it doesn't even like affect them. You could say, "Dude, that was shit. What's wrong with you?" And then they'll go home and they'll become a different athlete overnight because they were told that when that's what they needed to hear.
Absolutely.
Which one do you fall into? What do you respond?
It's like I like a good mix. Like I generally, I mean, I probably am better off hearing the things that didn't go well, because like I'll watch a match, like look back at my own matches, and I'm aware of what went well, And what I prefer to get is that situations where things didn't go well, I'd like to get a different perspective on what that was, because I have my own perception of like what went wrong in certain situations. But like I like to get different feedback, and probably the teammate that I can really, really rely on to give me the sort of feedback that I need to hear, and also the sort of coaching that I need to hear, because he thinks about jiu-jitsu in such a different way to me, is my teammate Mikhail Yahaya. Just like the way that we have like a really good back and forth when it comes to jiu-jitsu, because we think about it in such different ways. And for me personally, I really, really need that to get like a sort of an outside perspective on what's gone wrong in certain matches. Because like when it comes to things that went right, like I know what went right. The way that I train, like a lot of things I do are very, very deliberate. While some people are a little bit more like ad hoc and like they sort of just go with the flow. So when things go right, like I sort of know what they are.
Yeah, and those are the best people to have around you too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's definitely, you have certain people, you need certain people in your corner that have both plays, right? Like certain coaches in the area. For me, I remember with Rob Deagle, when I did a competition with him and he was coaching me, we were with like a few of the teammates, and he's the type that's a little bit more like blunt. And like I did a match and I won the match, and he was just like, that was complete dog shit. And you just hear like the other guy, like my friend, start laughing, and then I'm start laughing too. But then it's like, okay, well, here's what you did wrong. And sometimes those moments can be like incredibly hilarious if
For sure.
taken the right way. Yeah. But then I also have done training with like Jason Rao, and I'll show him like some videos of stuff, and he'll be like, oh, you did good there. And he'll like sandwich it. You did good there. Then, this you could put some work into, but then this is a good thing. And it's just like, it's kind of like interesting to see how everyone has that different coaching style. And it's fun.
Yeah,
So
I've definitely seen the opposite side of that, where I remember one event I was cornering, and the like so my teammate won, like, and I was very, very happy for them, and I could the coach for the opposing player, so that person came off, and the coach was just like basically berating them, and I was like, I looked at them, and you can like see from the body language that the person that had lost, that competitor, they really weren't receiving
very
well, sort of
negative,
like the
right?
way. Yeah. And then I saw that same coach do that to like multiple students, and I thought, oh wow, this is just the way that person coaches. Like they're not even like, they don't adjust how they do it. They just berate them, and it's just negative attitude. Like, because there wasn't even constructive criticism. It was just more like berating, and it's like, wow, like, is that really like how you coach your students?
That's terrible. I've seen that before at competitions. It's kind of, it like
Yeah.
hurts. It's kind of, especially from the perspective of being a coach, and that human beings have feelings. Like, to see it, it almost is like, damn, like that kid who went out there in their first like beginner tournament or whatever, who comes back and just gets berated. It's like they're never going to want to compete again.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny actually. A friend of mine was just telling me the other day that early on he was training at a particular gym, and he for the competition he'd worn like a new gi, so he didn't have the team patches on his gi, and he lost his match, and he came off, and his coach said to him, "You would have won that match if you had your patches on." And it was like, what?
I don't think that's how jiu-jitsu works.
Yeah, like that on multiple levels. That like sounded like the most ridiculous thing to say to someone. And he left that gym very shortly afterwards.
Well, surprise, surprise.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Sound like an encouraging environment.
yeah,
Yeah, nah, we can't do that. But I've been really enjoying this, but I definitely want to go through
sorry.
like
Yeah.
Belt 30. I wanted to start off with that, but 40 minutes of solid conversation, though. I enjoyed it. It's definitely something that we could talk about for a long period of time. But yeah, tell me about how you got started. What was something that really like drew you to jiu-jitsu, and how long were you a white belt for?
Sure. So I started jiu-jitsu in 2011. I was 16 years old, and it was we just moved to a new city. So we started one place, and like at the time, like my mum was getting me to do like some like kickboxing and stuff, because both my parents wanted me to make sure that I was doing sport every single year of school.
Nice.
Yeah. So we just moved cities, and so my mum was getting me to, well, both my parents were getting me to do some karate. So like, just because it was like, okay, there's some kickboxing, okay, we'll do some karate because like that's just right near where we live, like makes sense. And so I was doing karate for a little bit. And then just one day, like I saw like an MMA class and I thought, that looks cool. I know what MMA is. Like, I want to do that. And so I saw the MMA class and I went and asked the coach about it. And so this was at the same gym, like it was a karate gym, but like a couple of nights a week, they had like MMA and grappling on, and they had like a different coach that came into that gym to teach that. So I saw that going on and I thought, oh, that looks really cool. Like, I'm going to ask the coach. And he said to me, he said, oh yeah, you can like for sure jump in. But he's like, but if you you want to do MMA, like you need to jump in and do some of the jiu-jitsu too. And so I think I did one MMA class and I decided this jiu-jitsu stuff is way cooler. And so very quickly I dropped the karate, dropped the MMA, and just went just into jiu-jitsu. So
how long in your journey did it take for you to just be like obsessed with jiu-jitsu and stop doing everything else?
Like 2 weeks.
Wow. That's awesome, man. You like found your passion.
Yeah, so like super early, I was like, no, I just want to do this one thing. Yeah, so very quickly, like just the whole approach to it, I really liked. I liked the exchange, and I liked the arms race because I started that I started that, and then right at the same time, one of the guys the guys I was doing karate with, he was starting as well. And so we always had this just constant arms race in terms of, technique, which was really cool. And funnily enough, his name was Jeremy as well. So we were like when we were starting, we were the two 16-year-olds. We were like the youngest kids in the room doing jiu-jitsu, and we were just like the two Jeremys. And he had a fantastic. Yeah. Well, he doesn't train anymore now.
Oh, well, I guess you won.
Yeah, exactly. I win. I mean, he's married and he's got a kid, and he's very settled and happy with life. But I'm the one. I'm the one who won.
I think you won, man. I say you win. That stuff will come later.
But yeah, so that's what I found really interesting. When we were starting, as I mentioned, like that arms race, he got very good at attacking anacondas and Dar strangles from like a top position. And while I was playing like a lot of close guard at the time, so it was interesting to have like those two.
You're the bottom top guy.
Yeah. So
nice.
Yeah, no, I've played guard since the very start. So in 9 years of jiu-jitsu, there have been 2 matches where I didn't pull guard, and they were both last year because I'd already won the open weight division. So I thought, oh, well, when I do my weight division, I guess I'll try and wrestle.
How'd it go?
It went okay. I got my first takedown ever in jiu-jitsu.
Nice. I think, you know what? I think sometimes people sleep on the guard pullers, man. It's funny because when I was first moved to the gym down here, I was more into like leg locks, and I was definitely having fun with that because here and not in like the area where leg locks are, you get a little ego boost in the beginning. But I was always like pulling guard, and I remember like a couple of people like made some jokes about it, and I was like, all right, fine. And I get up and we start like wrestling and stuff, and that's fun. Yeah, but so to continue with you, you're starting to like go into now doing any competitions as a white belt?
Yeah, so I did one competition as a white belt. So I think I had 3 matches on that day. And this might have been like a year into jiu-jitsu. Like I did wait a little while to like jump into competition. So I had 1 match in the gi. That was the other thing as well. When I did jiu-jitsu, I did probably even split in terms of gi and no gi, probably right up until brown belt, or even like late purple belt. But yeah, so starting out, like I had 1 match in the gi, and that was a match where I think I pulled close guard. I got an advantage off an armbar attempt, but otherwise I just had close guard the entire match. So it was that white belt match.
Nice. Yeah.
Where you're trying to open up, but like you don't really know enough to really quite do that. The person on top doesn't really know how to pass. So not a whole lot happened other than the 1 armbar attempt. And so, and then I had 2 matches no-gi. So my first match, I think I won 11-0. And because it was my first time competing, I remember being so gassed that I had a fully locked up rear strangle. And just, I was so tired that I just could not finish it for the life of me.
You felt
I
it in
think
your arms, right?
Yeah, I just like, I had it fully locked up around his neck, but it was just, I had zero ability to squeeze. And like, that's at the stage where, you know, like as a white belt, like I'm not using my whole body to finish, like, you know, the choke. Instead, I'm just like, you know, trying to squeeze my arms together as tight as possible rather than like, you know, using my whole body for the motion. So like, I was completely gassed. I passed once, I took his back, I lost the back, I took it again. And it was just like, yeah, it was also like I remember that match being really, really, really sweaty and like really, really slippery.
You still got
But
the details going in your mind
yeah.
these years.
So I won that match 11-0, and then the following match I think I got passed and then arm triangled pretty quickly. And I'd never seen an arm triangle before. Like, and that's something that's interesting about our competition, particularly at a lower belt. You definitely see it at black belt every now and then, but particularly at lower belt, it's more about like like you're more likely to probably win by like attacking someone with a technique either with confidence or because it's something they've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I remember getting arm triangled. I remember that feeling.
It's like the worst ever, right?
Yeah, it was like so weird because I remember being, you know, familiar with different submissions, but that one felt like trapping and like you know, like, and quite claustrophobic in a very different sort of way. And I thought it was really, really interesting.
You were also exhausted at that point as well.
Yeah, and I think that was more to do with my inexperience in competition. Yeah.
Did you have like your family and friends there as well?
Yeah. Both my parents came along to watch. My parents actually come along to watch a lot of my events, like even like
Oh, that's
overseas.
cool.
Like they've come along to both ADCC trials, both in Kazakhstan and in Japan. Like they travel and come watch with me.
Nice. Those are the best fans, man.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love my parents. They're my biggest fans for sure.
That's awesome. But was there only one competition as a white belt?
Yeah, I only had the one competition at white belt. I'm trying to remember what other ones I did. I remember after that, I remember my first competition at blue belt in the gi, and it's funny.
So
Only a
before
couple
you
of
get
months
into
ago.
that though,
Sure, go
talk
ahead,
to
go
me
ahead.
about what was it like getting the blue belt?
That I remember that really, really well. Because I got my blue belt the same day that the other Jeremy got his blue belt too. So we have a good photo of us together,
Oh,
like with our blue belts on. And I think we have both had like these nice, cheap as like judo gis that we were wearing at the time. Yeah. And so that was an awesome sensation. Like, and so I do understand like why people um, like the belt system because like there is like, you know, like that dopamine sort of reward that you get when you get the blue belt. And I just remember being so happy to have my blue belt. I just wanted to be anything other than a white belt. Once I got my blue belt, like I haven't cared too much about it. Like I definitely like it's been nice to get the other belts. Don't get me wrong. But the blue belt was the one where I'm like, okay, awesome. I'm not a
you're no
white belt
longer a
anymore.
noob. Like you're
Yeah,
no longer like that brand new guy that just walked into the gym.
for sure.
You know,
Exactly.
you have
Like,
actually depending on the school, a majority of the students come in and think, yo, that guy's a badass. Because
yeah,
he's the blue belt now.
for sure.
That's cool. Now, what do you think was the major difference in your transition from white belt to blue belt? Like, what do you think, if anything, changed in maybe your training or the way that you thought?
I so probably white to blue belt, and probably towards the end of white belt was when I was like, I'd say blue belt was when I really started to study jiu-jitsu, like, and try and watch matches and like really understand them. I remember as white belt being like, okay, I know that I can study jiu-jitsu and try and watch what these guys are doing to learn it. And I'd watch matches, but I wouldn't quite understand what was going on. Like, and I didn't quite know how to absorb the information, but I thought, well, I just need to get better at jiu-jitsu to understand it more. Like, but I need to put the practice in, like with studying it. Cause I remember just being like, I know that, like if I keep studying this, like I'll get better at like trying to absorb the information. And like I definitely think that's true. Like I know people now that like, you know, they try and study matches and they're like, I just watch it and I just like it doesn't sink in. And I think that's its own skill set. So for me, that was probably like the big thing, white to blue belt was like just like realizing I can study matches and learn these techniques.
And I think sometimes too, I know I've had this experience, you watch something or you look at something and it doesn't really like resonate with you until
Yep.
like 3 months later. All of a sudden something happens and for whatever reason you remember that video clip that you watched again.
Sure. Yeah, and on that actually, so that was probably where like as I mentioned before, like the meows for me were a massive influence early on, like, and so I try and like study what they were doing, and I think that's where like I learned more about like how studying works in terms of it's not about just watching a one-off match. What you want to do is watch a few matches of that same competitor doing you know, the same thing and watching different variations of the same technique. So you get like a bit of a contrast and you look at, okay, these are the commonalities. This is what the person's doing to defend and this is how they're overcoming that. Like, and so you start to learn like, okay, was that more like a faux pas in the moment where they place their foot from here to here? Or is that something they're doing, you know, consistently? And that for me was how, like getting into blue belt, I was learning, you know, how to do leg locks.
I see what you mean though. Like, was that step he took like a conscious step, or was it just something that he randomly did in that one match? And if you notice the trend, then you can say, okay, this is something that I could possibly apply.
Absolutely. Like even you know, like Eddie Cummings, for example, he was talking. He was I believe there's a podcast he was on like quite a few years ago, but he was just talking about that where he was discussing this idea. He was explaining how he was discussing this thing with John Danaher about he'd watch MMA matches and he's like, why do all these people make the same mistake from underneath mount? And he was and apparently John explained to him the fact that there was a famous black belt that was going around teaching a particular mount escape, but it doesn't work. But he would demonstrate it on a white belt. So you have like this technique that was taught by dogma. So in the moment when you're watching the MMA fight, it's something that looks like a very clear mistake the person's making, but people are consistently making that mistake. And that's what you're looking for. You don't want to make like an assumption about what someone is doing at the first pass. You want to look for some consistency.
That's nuts. How one person can just like ruin everyone's day, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
Like it literally ruins every fight. And they probably just think, oh, you didn't do the technique right.
Yeah,
You know?
for sure. And that's something that I'm not a big fan of in regards to the whole like invisible jiu-jitsu thing. Sorry, not calling it invisible jiu-jitsu, but like that's one example that I see come up in terms of like there was like a bit of a back and forth between Henry Akins and Keenan. I don't have a particular, you know, side to that discussion, but in terms of like it was a bit of a back and forth in regards to invisible jiu-jitsu where, you know, Henry Akins is talking about like one type of technique, Keenan saying it doesn't work, Henry saying that he's not doing it correctly. Now I don't have like an opinion on that particular technique, but more just that idea about like that's the example I can think of when people say like, oh, you're just not doing it correctly. It's like, well, let's look at what they're not doing correctly. And then going back to what we're talking about in regards to coaching is my belief is that if someone's not doing it correctly, it's probably not a problem with them. And it's probably a way that I've conveyed the information. Because while I might have shown them how to do it correctly, the things that I've emphasized are probably not resonating with them.
Yeah, some people need to hear different things.
Exactly. Some people need to be explained things in very literal ways. Some people need more analogous explanations. Different people need different ways, you know, of being like taught techniques. And that goes back to what we're talking about with competition and different feedback that you can give to people. People absorb, like receive information in different ways, and you need to be able to tailor that. For me personally, I like very literal information. I like very literal sort of cues, and I like knowing the mechanics behind things. While certain people need analogous cues, and someone like Eddie Bravo is a fantastic example of that. Like he uses very analogous names for a lot of his positions, as well as the way that he describes them and teaches them. Like for example, like they have like the crystal ball, like the way that you're moving like your arm around their head to go to like a crossface. I believe that's what the technique is. Or from a rubber guard, they talk about like a zombie arm, like, you know, and the way that they describe it is it's an arm reaching out from the grave to circle. Like Like, so not everyone like does it that way. Like, while for example, like Danaher, he uses more literal, like he uses a bit of a blend between analogous as well as literal. Like, you know, he uses terms like moving from east to west. Like, so, and I think that's reflective of the way that he's also been educated. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
it has to be a reflection. How you coach is how you've been coached in some ways.
exactly. And I believe his background's epistemology. So John, when he teaches things, he uses a lot more coaching cues, and he uses cues that are kind of analogous, kind of literal, like and also like the terminology he uses for a lot of things. But like, you know, for the same technique, let's say from like that zombie arm, he talks about circling, you know, your hands inside of their wrist and moving
It
inside of
almost
their
sounds
waist.
like the way he describes the move is how the move is performed versus just having a name.
Exactly. Exactly. But
Very
then like at the
interesting.
same time, like the way that he describes parts of the body. Like for example, like he'll talk about circling his hands inside of your, you know, your opponent's forearms, and then like he'll reinforce that idea that you're moving with inside their wedges. Like which is like where it comes, like, you know, he uses like a blend of like analogous and literal.
That's like mind-blowing stuff right there. But it's just crazy to see how people can pick up on different ways of explanation for the same
Sure.
thing almost.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, like and I think that's really important to both the coaching side of jiu-jitsu as well as you know, like you know, also being as a student absorbing information. And I think that's some of the things that people talk about when they say like, you know, oh, I don't really like this sort of you know, this sort of coach versus another coach. And like that's why I think, you know, like if you look at say Gordon Ryan and John Danaher's instructionals, they show a lot of similar techniques, but they teach them very differently. And my guess would be that that's a reflection of how they understand jujitsu. So John will talk a lot more about rules and theories, but also add in details, and he'll teach things in ways that have like common threads that trail sort of throughout his instructionals and techniques. While Gordon does a lot more of like his feels like a system, but in a different way in terms of he's a lot more binary in terms of, okay, we have an input, like we take in an input and then we have an output and response. And so his is a lot more of if and thens, like, and so his will be more of a collection of techniques, but it's still a system. But just, I think the way that Gordon performs is when he's rolling with someone, he goes, okay, they do this, I do this. Rather, John will teach like, okay, we're looking for these sort of key points across, you know, a position.
I guess that would probably be the difference between them, as one of them is somebody who teaches and learns from teaching others and seeing, okay,
Yes.
that move work, and with three of my students, they were able
Yes.
to perform that move consistently, versus
Exactly.
somebody who was like, I actually did this move.
Exactly.
I did it, and it gets explained differently
For
from those
sure.
perspectives.
Exactly. And I think
Super
as
interesting.
Gordon as a competitor, his in his brain, I imagine that the way that he arranges a lot of the techniques is his is like a table of techniques, and he's just waiting for an input, and he's got the perfect, like, you know, response to that. And that's why I think as well, you see the way Gordon competes is it looks what he's doing looks very simple in terms of like he looks like he's using what they describe as like fundamental and foundational techniques, but really the techniques that he's applying are very, very sophisticated. It's the perfect solution to the perfect problem. And I think, you know, that's also like a like that's reflected in the way that he teaches his jiu-jitsu in the DVDs.
Do you think that one could be better than the other, or do you think they both have their places in different situations?
Um, well, going back to what we've talked about, I think it totally is dependent on the person. I think, you know, some people, they just want to know like a solution to the problem, and they want to build up like almost like, you know, like a flow chart of techniques. Like, you know, I do this, they're either going to do this, this, or this, and and I'm going to do this in response. I use more of that. Like when I take notes, mine is more of like a I do this, they do this, they do like I do this. Like there is a back and forth of inputs.
Yeah, that's kind of how I do it too.
Um, while some people they prefer, like they'll talk about, they say they prefer more of a conceptual style, and like some people, you know, like like a great example is like Leandro Lo. And I feel like you watch like someone like Leandro Lo, and he does like he knows what he's doing works. I just don't think he knows what he's doing necessarily, and not in the sense that like like it's not good technique. It's just I think he just goes with the flow. So like you have such a wide variety of different approaches to jiu-jitsu and different ways people think about jiu-jitsu.
I have an interesting story to add to that. That's very interesting. So I was with Rob one day, and he was telling me about how he met, I believe it was Ross Nichols. I believe he met him in the UK, and they were talking, and Ross Nichols said that he never really watched his own matches, and that he was almost like not even conscious of what he does. And Rob's a very like he'll study somebody and break down their entire game on a sheet of paper and talk about like what they do. And he actually had notes of that, and he showed it to him. And Ross was like, "Oh, like you know my game more than I do." And that's so interesting how some people can just like, "Oh yeah, I'm just like good at jiu-jitsu."
Yeah.
It's like that's just it blows my mind how that's a thing. Anyway, though, I do want to continue on with the
absolutely
stuff. This has been great, though. I don't get me wrong. I actually think that anybody who's listening into this, including myself, can find a lot of value from.
I hope so.
Now, so you're now a blue belt. You just got promoted. I'm sure the 4-stripe white belts are now looking at you differently. What goes on in blue belt? What are some highlights?
Sure. So blue belt was when I moved to a gym. So I originally started at a gym called Hunter Valley Martial Arts, and that was just nearby to my house. So blue belt was when I'm just trying to think because I got my blue belt when I was 18, and so during blue belt quite early on was when like I was starting to like get my first job, things like that, as well as like starting to look at like going to university and things. I never finished anything at university, but I just did like a year bridging course before deciding to spend more time on jiu-jitsu. But so that's when like my schedule was
same, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's when my schedule was changing quite a fair bit. And so just in terms of like the timetable for jiu-jitsu and things like that, like I started looking like at a different gym. So that's when I started training at a gym called Best in Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. So that's ran by Luke Beston and Angela Gracie, and it's a Hoist Gracie affiliate. And so that gym, their focus is more self-defense, in terms of like that will be like more the theme for the gym. But Luke himself is very much a jiu-jitsu nerd. Or not even a jiu-jitsu nerd, because I wouldn't limit him like that. He's a martial arts nerd. He watches absolutely everything, and he obsesses over anything just that's a martial arts technique, and not even in terms of just like unarmed combat. Like he's very interested in like Kali, a lot of like Europe, European martial arts in terms of like a lot of the sword fighting. He's into everything. Like he finds guns interesting, just all of it. So Luke is like a holistic martial arts nerd, but his focus is self-defense. So he finds like competition jiu-jitsu very fascinating, and encourages everyone to really pursue their own flavor of martial arts, despite the fact that he's
those type of people.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And so Luke's absolutely fantastic. So I ended up moving to there. And so for me, the jiu-jitsu changed a lot across blue belt. So that's when like I probably around then and towards later blue belt was when leg locks really started to come in. So I was a blue belt for 3 years. So I got my blue belt in 2013. And then so I was a blue belt for 3 years after that. And so across that period, so blue belt was when I really started trying to find like really started like more looking at like, okay, like there's all these things going on in jiu-jitsu. I'm studying these other guys. How do I start building a strategy for competition? So that's when like I was training probably more in the gi, and I was really getting into both berimbolos and also omoplatas. And so omoplatas was probably like my main game through most of blue belt. As well as straight ankle locks, actually, probably like, looking at more like berimbolas,
Right.
omoplatas, and straight ankle locks, like playing like sort of like a mix of those. And so as we mentioned, like, across white belt, like, like that's where I was looking at like more studying jiu-jitsu. And then blue belt was when I was getting a lot better at studying jiu-jitsu. And that's when I did like a much better job of like trying to actually like absorb what the person is doing.
It sounds like you were
And
systematizing it as well.
yeah, like, and doing a better job at that, like, that's where I really, like, when I was studying the berimbolo at the time, like, that's where I did a much better job. And, like, I really started finding my own process in terms of how do I want to study these techniques, where, I'd be able to sit down and I'd have, like, a playlist of, like, Mihai Brothers matches. And I'd be able to, like, sit there and I'd write down, like, what they were doing. Like, instead of just sitting there and just watching it and trying to watch what they're doing, like, doing a better job of, like, writing down what they were doing, and like starting to do a better job of like experimenting with that and like working out like, okay, like because you can write down like all these different things and like try and absorb all the different details of what they're doing, but it's whether or not like what you're observing and what you're absorbing actually going to make a difference to how you do the technique.
So it was like, would it be more important for you to lay out what stood out to you about that technique?
Yeah, exactly. So like
Right?
as we
Rather than being like,
mentioned,
okay,
like
let me slow it down, look at it, because and then I'm sure once you get 10 steps, it's hard to remember, versus like
exactly.
one or two really powerful things.
Absolutely, or even like the steps, because like the way that I break down jujitsu, for me is there is what's going on superficially, and I'm like for example, like I'm not like when I say superficially, like not like where you're placing like your hand, but more just like where you're broadly speaking positioning your body, and then there's the details that go into the technique after that. So it's like like a berimbolo, like, yeah, you have like a deep, like a De La Riva hook that goes kind of through, like around their legs. You've got your inside leg that goes across their hips, and you're trying to invert your body. And to me, that's, like the superficial side of it. And then after that, it's like, okay, how is he engaging his left, like, his outside leg with like, the primary leg for the berimbolo? Is he trying to drive off the front of their hips so he can lift his hips? Like, is he trying to hook across his hips? Like different things like that, and trying to like play around with, what's going on with the technique. And I think that's where I was doing a better job as well in terms of studying jiu-jitsu and trying to practice what was going on in drilling and trying to experiment a little bit more. And that's really what led into towards the end of blue belt, like experimenting with leg locks. So around that time as well, towards the end of blue belt for me, was when Grappling Industries came along in Australia.
Nice.
And so
Yeah, that's probably was big for you guys.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and actually, I think it's one of the things that really, really helped Australian Jiu-Jitsu in regards to leg locks, because you can kind of see the difference between, like, say, Australia and other parts of the world in terms of, like, say, for example, Australia compared to Europe. Australia got to have a lot of competitions with heel hooks and leg locks long before Europe did, or at least like the UK. Like the UK's like got Grappling Industries now, and like they've got a lot more events. Like they've had like a massive boom in terms of like these events that allowed leg locks. And like you had events like Polaris, for example, that were allowing leg locks, but in terms of like broadly across the country, like the local competitions, like they didn't have that for a little while. So Australia got a little bit of an edge there. And
That's
so,
you can see
sorry,
how much it's progressed the sport and how much it's blown up just over the past
for
like
sure.
years.
Absolutely.
I think it's
And
really
so,
continued to rise.
Grappling Industries was coming along. And so I remember being as a blue belt looking at the way that they'd organized the division. And so as I mentioned, like I was a blue belt for 3 years. So it meant that like I would have fit more into the advanced divisions for the Grappling Industries Nogi events.
Yeah.
And so I remember seeing that and going, oh, heel hooks, shit, I don't know anything about these. I'd learned like a Kana Basami like at white belt, and like I'd learned an inside heel hook at white belt, but like it wasn't something I was using in practice. And so I remember having to like go to Luke and say, hey, I've got to start practicing heel hooks like for this competition that's coming up, and I don't really know anything about it. And so this was before this was before the EBI, I believe. or it might have been it might have been right around that time actually, that the EBI 4 with Eddie Cummings, where I believe he'd taken on Joe Soto in the final, and he heel hooked everyone along the way.
I think that was what really like sparked everyone's interest, right?
Absolutely. Like that was definitely it for me. And so I think it was right around the same time that happened, where I had this competition coming up where I needed to know heel hooks. And I remember having to go to Luke, and his response to that was, okay, I normally only let the black belts practice heel hooks. He said, but you and Keown, so Keown was a brown belt at the time, and he said to me, you and Keown can start doing like some heel hooks together. And then like with that, like Luke started letting like a lot more people start to do heel hooks. Like Luke's very, very open-minded to a lot of these things. And isn't
That's a pretty
afraid.
cool moment though, man. That's a pretty cool moment.
Yeah, and like so Luke's really, really awesome in that regard, where he was like, okay, like you've got this competition coming up. He's like, and it's probably like, healthy in terms of like, learn those skills for like, people to be doing heel hooks. So he started allowing heel hooks within the gym. I think it's just before that, like, because no one was really interested in doing them, like there's no reason to just be like letting people run wild with them. Like,
yeah. Especially before it was really like no one really knew that it was as efficient as it was.
Yeah, exactly. And as well as like it's one of those things where like all submissions are dangerous, and like the most dangerous part about submissions is not knowing what you're in for. So like I don't think leg locks are particularly dangerous compared to other submissions, but there's certainly danger to them if you're not familiar with them at all. Like I completely agree about that. And so like leg locks is something that Luke hadn't spent really much time on. And as well as like, the sport in general wasn't particularly familiar with leg locks. So like I totally understand why like Luke had, didn't like have anyone like rolling with leg locks at that stage. So I had this competition coming up, where this grappling industry is, where as a blue belt, like I had to start learning leg locks. And like this was several months out. But I could just see it, and I thought, oh well, if I want to do these competitions, actually, you know what? I think what it was I'd done the gi, and because I didn't know leg locks, I didn't do the no gi.
Right.
And so I think that's what it was.
That makes sense.
Sorry, this is like 4 or 5 years ago that I'm trying to remember.
How dare you not remember what you had for breakfast? Like,
so I think that's what it was. Is I did a gi match at blue belt, and I didn't do the no gi. So and I didn't do the no gi because I didn't know the heel hooks for that. So I was like, okay, the next one I'm going to do the heel hooks. And I'd done a couple of like competitions at blue belt at that stage, and like I was doing like okay, but I never like I was not having like notable success or anything like that. And so like I just did competition because I thought it was just good to do it, and it was fun to test these different techniques. But yeah, so that's where leg locks were coming along, and I really needed to start learning how to do this stuff. And so that's where Keown and I were really like doing like a lot of practice outside of training, a lot of extracurricular sort of like training to start learning these leg locks. Like Keown like knew some heel hooks because he trained with like a lot of MMA guys. He had a really strong ankle lock game. And so we really got to start like doing heel hooks. And like, I remember just that period of time where I was studying madly, trying to learn how to like do heel hooks, as well as like trying to go into the gym. And like Keown and I had like hours and hours and hours of just rolling together and drilling together, like just trying to learn all this stuff. And that's for me where like I had like a massive, like really starting to link up that sort of process in terms of how to learn jiu-jitsu.
I think that helps jiu-jitsu the most. I remember ever since I started having those sessions with certain individuals where, shout out Max, he's actually Max is the guy who sent me your match that I originally commentated over. We would drill together for like 3, 4, 5 hours, looking over tape, drilling moves. I think that is like the best stuff for development.
For sure. And so for me, like, starting with like trying to study the meows, and I think even I remember at one stage looking at Majid Haig, who had that baseball bat choke that he pulled from bottom side control essentially, and choked out Clark Gracie. I remember like studying some of that, and then with the leg locks, this is where I really found sort of my process for studying and really starting to understand how I learned. And what that did was it wasn't just good for me in terms of learning leg locks. Um, it helped me try and pick this sort of isolated topic, understand like like going into this topic where I knew nothing, and really giving myself an opportunity to start like learning how I learn. And then that bled across into everything else, because I went, okay, I know that this is how that I learn jiu-jitsu, and this is the process that works for me. And so just applying it to everything else.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
so, yeah, and so with that as well, like I had a couple of months to get ready for this one, like this grappling industries, where I had to learn leg locks, and that's probably the first time that I really found success in competition as well. I took gold in my weight division, which was a first time ever for me, and
That was advanced
I
too.
yeah, so gold in my weight division, as well as I think I took bronze in the open weight. And so for me, like that was a pretty big deal for me. Like I went into the open weight, heel hooked a few people. I lost the semifinals by decision. And then I went against a UFC fighter in like the bronze medal match, and heel hooked him. And like for me, like that was like a massive deal for me at the time, because it was like, oh, I'm going against like all these black belts and like these UFC fighters and stuff. Like for me, that was massive, because I was just
Oh
used
yeah.
to training at my little gym, and like,
In your
yeah,
division, where it was your weight class, did you wind up just heel hooking everybody?
yeah, I just heel hooked and knee barred everyone.
That's so funny.
Yeah,
Isn't
I
that
was
funny
like,
how that's just like there's people that literally spend like their entire life doing this like way of jujitsu, and then leg locks just become a thing, like more popular, and now you can just go out there and kind of
it just throws a wrench in it for them. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. And I remember just, yeah, like I remember that event really, really well. So
Oh,
it
that's
was the
probably a
first
great
time
day.
yeah, and it was the first time I'd really found success in competition. And it's funny, so I just mentioned that in the open weight division, I lost in the semifinals, and that might have been the best, probably one of the most influential matches in my life, because that's actually where I met the match I lost was actually against Mikhail Yahya, the teammate I mentioned before. So he'd come up to Sydney to go compete in grappling industries, and just like jumped in the open weight division, and I lost to him in the semifinals. And so that's where I met Mikhail for the first time. And he was the one who said to me, hey, you should come down to Melbourne and like just come train with us. Come train at Absolute MMA.
This is the
And just
person
like
who
come
just beat
visit.
you.
Yeah,
Isn't that crazy how that works in jujitsu?
absolutely.
There's not like a hatred for each other. There's just
Absolutely.
like
That was
yeah, let's keep helping each other.
exactly like it was like, and to me, I think about that a lot. Like that was that was quite crazy to me, because that might have been one of the most influential moments in all of my jiu-jitsu career, with meeting Mikhail, because that was the reason that I went down and trained at Absolute, and it's totally changed the rest of my career.
Is that where you wind up getting your purple belt?
I got my purple belt from Luke not long after that event, and then so it took me probably nearly a year, I think, before I went and trained at Absolute in Melbourne. But
Oh,
like,
after that event, it took you a full year to get over there.
I think so, yeah. So
Wow,
so
funny.
I believe it took me about a year. I've got to get my dates straight. But because this was because this event was towards the end of blue belt for me.
Yeah. Soon after you
Um,
got your purple.
yeah.
What was that feeling like?
That was cool. It was it was certainly a cool feeling, and it was one of those times where I felt like, when I got my blue belt, I didn't necessarily feel like a blue belt. When I got my purple belt, I did feel like a purple belt. Like at least I felt like I didn't have that moment where I thought, oh, I shouldn't be a purple belt,
You
because
didn't
I've
doubt
been a blue
yourself.
belt. Sorry.
You didn't doubt yourself.
No, I didn't doubt myself on that, only because I was a blue belt for about 3 years, and like at that stage I was competing. I was already having matches against like other purple belts, brown belts, and black belts,
Yeah.
and like finding
You're right.
success in them. So I felt like okay, and I really felt like, like I was really like starting to like understand jiu-jitsu, and I felt like I'd really found like my own sort of process for jiu-jitsu.
They say that the purple belt is where you start to get advanced.
Yeah, and that's really where I started to develop leg locks, like my own leg locks. So leg locks was something that I was working on my own before moving to Absolute. But like, you know, I was aware of like what Craig and Lachlan were doing at the time. And so when I first went and visited Absolute, I was a purple belt. And I remember, so I visited, and I was only staying for about a week. I visited Absolute a couple of times before I actually moved down there.
Did you move to go there?
Yeah. That I moved to Melbourne to train at Absolute because with that it's funny. I had this. I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and I thought, well, I can either join the army or I can go do jiu-jitsu full time.
How old were you at that point? You were like what, 21?
Yeah, I think I was either 21 or 22.
Yep, that's the moment.
Yeah, and so I was like, well, I guess if this jiu-jitsu thing doesn't work out, I can always join the army.
Right. It's not going anywhere.
Exactly. So I thought, okay, well, like, I'll just pull the trigger and move to Melbourne. And so yeah, so I was umming and ahhing for about a good year before I actually like moved to Melbourne. But yeah, so the first time I'd ever visited Absolute, I was a purple belt at the time, and like I had like I'd found success in competition in terms of like I'd been like heel hooking people. I'd really sort of found my approach to jiu-jitsu, and this is when the Death Squad was getting popular. So this is when, you know, this was before anyone knew about, like, this was before Gordon was Gordon. This was before Gordon had his appearance on EBI. And it was just sort of Gary and Eddie at the time. And so at that stage, I was just like watching any Eddie Cummings match I could get my hands on and just studying it like crazy. Yeah, and so the first time I visited Absolute, this was the week that I arrived there was probably I think Craig was about 2 weeks out from competing on EBI for the first time, and this was an EBI event that was before the ADCC that Craig beat Leandro Lowe. So not a lot of people actually realize that Craig was on EBI long before then. Everyone remembers his EBI run where he fought Gordon in the final, but he actually had before that an EBI event he was on where who did he go against? I can't remember.
If I remember correctly, right? It was because he went so he did the EBI with Gordon Ryan. Before that was the ADCC that kind of like blew him up, right? And then before that was the EBI that you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that EBI was that EBI actually Gordon was in it in the same bracket as Craig, and it was against Wagner Hoscher in the final. I've got to double check that actually. I'd have to look that up. I remember Craig's matches. I just can't remember if Gordon was in.
Do you remember which EBI it was?
It was. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, this is what we got the internet for, you know. What year was this?
What year was this? This would have been.
This was before 2017.
Yeah, so this would have been 2016. So I think that would have been the EBI that Gordon was on, because Gordon first appeared on EBI in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
Craig Jones EBI. Let's find this one.
The history of it is super interesting, man.
Yeah. I remember
4 years has changed.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I remember Craig fought. He went against Nathan Orchard first round, and he heel hooked him.
That same one. Yeah,
and then Dara O'Connell the following round, where he locked up an armbar, a Choi bar variation, which was what Robert's Rob Deggle's been posting about recently, that he calls the arm saddle.
Yes.
So Craig had locked up, had used that entry. So we call that the Choi bar because of a guy called Choi One Choi. So I think it's quite a good setup. I think Craig had set that up against him from reverse De La Riva, and that's when there was sort of that thing, that weird moment where Eddie Bravo had called time, even though Dara didn't tap. Craig had just like locked up the armbar. Eddie called time and they stopped, and Dara was like, I didn't tap. And he didn't tap, like to be fair. Like he didn't tap, and like so they had to restart the match. And then
They
Craig
restarted it from neutral, right?
Sorry?
They started it from neutral. Like
they started it from, I believe they started it from the spiderweb position.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they restarted from the spiderweb position, but like with Dara's arms like connected, and then he escaped from there, and then that led into Craig heel hooking him. And then after that, he fought Wagner Hosher in the semifinals, and then I believe Wagner lost to Gordon in the final.
Oh, so Wagner ended up beating Craig Jones at that time.
It was EBI 11, yeah. So that was yeah, that would have been Gordon's first appearance. Or no, that would have been Gordon's second appearance on EBI. Actually, you know what? It might not. It might be his third, because I believe Gordon was on EBI 6, then 8, and then potentially 11. Because I remember Gordon's first 2 runs at EBI, that was when he was trying to heel hook and leg lock everyone.
Yeah.
Like just to win. And then I think 11 was the first time where he was. Yeah, and then 11 was the first time where he was just like, I'm not going to use leg locks, and he strangled everyone.
Probably changed the world right there. As far
Yeah.
as everyone thinking like, well, everyone kind of at that point was probably thinking like, oh, you just do leg locks.
Exactly. And so I think that's when
it's all combined is when the beauty comes out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the reason I was going sort of off on that tangent was, so the first time I visited Absolute was the first time I ever got to see what specialized and professional training looked like. So up until that stage, I had the stuff that I was working on in training. But the way that it worked at our gym was like we drilled and then we rolled. Like that idea of positional training, like I hadn't actually seen that before. And like I think it's one of those things where everyone does positional training now, and like they go, well, obviously you do positional training, but like this was like 2016, like you know, like people weren't taking jiu-jitsu. Like I think people have a much better process across the board now for jiu-jitsu, but at the time people weren't really doing those sort of things where they were really trying to understand jiu-jitsu, and they were really trying to, you know, like develop skill sets very, very quickly. I think people were kind of just drilling, they'd rock up and then they'd go roll. Mm-hmm. And like that's how most people were training at the time.
I think people really started to fall in love with like the nerdy side of it, where it was like this fun endeavor of like with your friends, you guys can go and like watch YouTube videos and like look online and see what people are doing at like the highest level and try to like replicate that almost. That
for sure
right there accelerates everything.
Yeah. And so when I visited, like this is when like Craig was right in the middle of getting ready for EBI, and that's where I really saw like, oh, this is what's setting these guys apart, is not just like the techniques they're doing, but the way that they're training to get good. They're getting really, really specialized in a select number of areas and making sure that they're very experienced in those areas. Like I understood that in the sense that like, you know, like you want to work on these things, but they're making sure that not only have they drilled these things, that they're putting in the positional training, so that the way they also have all the experience there too. And and also training for like, you know, starting in bad positions. So this is when I'd seen for the first time, like, oh, I'd seen it with the EBI in terms of like, you know, like starting in spiderweb and defending, but like, you know, seeing how like in a training camp that they were putting, like they were starting from that position, like over and over and over, or like starting with someone on your back and like trying to, you know, develop a process for these positions.
That's the thing too.
Yeah, and then not just like doing it for like those, but also doing it for, you know, starting in saddle, starting in top mount, like all these different things.
I'm sure people got really good using that strategy of training. So now you're first introduced to this as a purple belt. What was some of your? It sounds to me like you competed a lot as a purple belt.
Like I competed. That purple belt might have been where I've competed the most.
What do you think were like the top most important ones for you, as far as like development, but also maybe even like credibility in the community as well?
So there was the first time that I as I mentioned, like that competition where I was doing leg locks for the first time. It was the first time I won. I won like, you know, a gold medal in a division, and it was doing the open weight as well, like taking bronze. And so that, yeah, so for me that was like very, very influential in terms of like, oh, I can do this. And it was also the first time I'd ever felt confident in competing. Like after that, like, so everyone like competes differently. For me now, I don't get nervous at all before I compete. And like at the time, like I didn't get so nervous leading into competition, but every single time I competed, I'd get such a massive adrenaline rush that like I'd physically get tunnel vision. Like not just like tunnel vision in terms of like single-minded, but in terms of I felt like I couldn't see. And so the first time I did that where I heel hooked people and taken gold, like it pretty much almost like cured me of that adrenaline rush. Because after that, like I didn't really get like adrenaline dumps. I felt very clear headed when I competed. So for me, that first time winning a local competition like really, really helped me. And I
That's a
think
lot to
as
do with the
well, like,
confidence, right?
yeah, and I think as well on top of that is that around that time, like I was really developing a deliberate process for my jiu-jitsu. I think that really helps a lot of people have a clear head in competition, having a clear direction that they want to move in the moment. Like there's some people that I could talk about, like where there's a difference in the way that they trained, and they made a massive switch in the way that they trained, and that had a massive impact on the way they competed. Like certain people that I know of that were like, you know, that people that were good in competition, but the way that they trained was they sort of just like they had the areas they were good at, but they were still just going by feel. And then they started training with a deliberate process where they were really drilling a lot of techniques and applying those deliberate techniques in training. And then it meant that when they came to competition, they were very, very sharp. So before that, they didn't compete anywhere near to their potential in the gym. And then when they start switching to that more deliberate process, it really comes out in competition, because it means like under pressure, when the adrenaline's pumping and like when people are feeling nervous, you're not going to be all that creative. You're not
No.
going to be able to just on the fly just like be like, yeah, I feel good, like I can just make up these techniques and pass this guy's guard. And that's where I think for some people, having like a very calculated approach and knowing what you want to do from each position is going to pay dividends.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like that's where around that time I'd first found success in competition. So it helped deal with nerves, as well as I'd really, really, you know, developed a more deliberate process to what I wanted to do. And so that really helped with competition as well. So like now, like for me these days, I don't feel nervous at all. I don't get any adrenaline rush. And so I think that's why for me, that first competition winning was stands out so much. Not because I won, but because of more the shift in the way that I felt during competition.
Mm. Well, I think there also can be a sense of like, I got this. Like there's a sense of like, oh, I can do this. I
Yeah,
can accomplish
exactly.
this. I think there's a big thing about like submitting somebody when you're in the competition that I think
Yeah,
makes a big difference. I know I experienced that in my most recent tournament. I did the intermediate level for the first time, and I was able to
awesome.
score 2 submissions. And then like ever since then, I felt like, I got second place at intermediate, which is like, it's not the best thing ever, but for me, it was like a really cool experience. And like
For
ever
sure.
since then, I kind of felt like I had a little bit more like swagger with my jujitsu almost. Like I feel
For
like
sure.
it's like, oh, I'm confident in like what works. And now I'm like sharpening that and it's becoming a little
Yeah.
bit more systemized. It sounds to me like as we recap this, it's kind of like white belt, you're kind of just like you're just showing up. It was the most important thing.
Yeah.
Blue belt was kind of like that belt where you started to recognize it as like a game and you started to
Yeah.
systematize it. And now purple belt, you've actually started to apply that system.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, purple belt, one of the big things there was more refinement and really sort of drilling down into my learning process a lot more. And so not just getting more detailed with techniques, but also getting more detailed in terms of understanding how I absorb this information and how I apply it in competition, because I was competing more and more, and I sort of started to see more the differences with, okay, this is how the technique plays out in the gym, and this is more realistically how it plays out in competition. And so
Yeah.
sort of starting to tailor what I was doing more towards competition and not just rolling in the gym. and starting to look more at like competition strategy as well, and gearing my skill sets more around that. And so across the course of my jiu-jitsu journey overall, it's been more and more of that, and I can really clearly in my mind sort of see where I made those distinctions and added in sort of extra layers to what my process was.
Yeah, that makes sense. So now, what's it like going into the brown belt range?
Sure.
Firstly,
Yeah.
tell me about the experience of actually like getting promoted, leading up to it, a little bit after.
Awesome. So brown belt, I was teaching before brown belt, but brown belt for me has really where I've taken that process and almost come full circle in that regard, where I've gone from white belt starting to study jiu-jitsu, blue belt starting to learn how to study properly and start like applying it to my game, and then purple belt really taking that and like developing it for competition and finding success with it. And then brown belt's come full circle where I've really sort of developed how I take that information and not just apply it to myself, but also transfer it to other people and coach other people, and really starting to understand not just how I learn, but about how other people learn. And so my efforts at brown belt have really not just been towards competition and really trying to sharpen things there, but also I spent a lot of time trying to learn how to coach people and trying to study that and trying to like look at how other people learn and how other people coach.
Did the amount of instruction that you do for people increase since becoming a brown belt?
Absolutely, exponentially so. And I've been really fortunate in that regard, where particularly with both Luke Beston, Lachlan Giles, and Craig Jones, and also other people like from Best and Gracie, like Grant Bradshaw. I've had some really, really fantastic coaches and people that have worked in education as well. So both Luke Beston, who runs like quite a good school and is very much so a martial arts nerd, has been like a massive influence on me as a coach. As well as from that gym, one of the other black belts, Grant Bradshaw, who's actually a high school teacher. And so getting to learn from them how to coach, like they've been massive influences, even though I wasn't necessarily trying to take in like how they were teaching, just having them there passively sort of like seeing how that they teach. And then as well as like Lachlan, for example, who has, a doctorate in physiotherapy.
Very well
as well as as well as Craig as well, who has a fantastic approach to teaching, like that people see in the way that like his instructionals online, as well as and same with Lachlan as well. So I really feel fortunate that I've had some fantastic influences, like not just on my jiu-jitsu, but also like fantastic role models as coaches.
It sounds like that's where most of like what you're going to support yourself with is going to be in as well. Like
Yeah, for sure. And it's also the side of jiu-jitsu that I actually enjoy more. For me, competition is a way of like taking what I know and testing it in competition, as well as it gives me a framework to operate within. Like in jiu-jitsu, you can do so much and you can go down so many rabbit holes, but there's only so much of it that is actually important for competition, not just in terms of like broadly in competition, but also the metagaming side to things, like finding like counters to the body lock, because that's like sort of like what's popular at the moment in terms of passing. And
I think especially as that being kind of like the anti-leg lock game, where people have their head low,
exactly.
their arms narrow, and their legs are back.
Exactly. Like, and so and on that, even like not just like looking at, okay, how do I develop a metagame in terms of like beating people at things that they're not like they're not proficient at. So like a great example of that for me was the leg locks. And then on top of that, it's like, okay, how do we metagame the metagame? How do we like work on anti-jiu-jitsu? And really developing that, and then
Right,
okay,
just a little bit further into that. I think that's actually a very interesting topic of like
sure.
anti-jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So really trying to exploit like what is popular at the moment, and like looking at like shutting down people's games in like really, really interesting ways. So like like as you mentioned, like the body lock is a fantastic example of that, where it really sort of breaks the like the seated open guard, at least the entries into the legs. Like, because when you're looking at like a body lock, you're basically separating, a guard player's upper half from their lower half. And to elevate someone, you need to be bringing your entire body underneath them, whether you're going to be elevating them or whether they're standing and you've already got access to the legs. And so I'd say on the anti-jiu-jitsu side of things, it's not just looking at ways that I can enforce my own game. It would be ways where I can enforce my own game while putting myself in a position that denies the other person their game. So like a great example of that would be people talk about with leg locks, like, say inside positioning. So like we have inside positioning and we have outside positioning, and people talk about those. But we also have mutual inside positioning and mutual outside positioning. And so one example of like, mutual outside positioning is that it's a area that I think people explore in specific ways, but they don't really drill into it in terms of a broader concept. So an example of like mutual outside positioning would be Toriando passing, moving side to side. So that way my legs are like we take like both of our legs. One person's legs are here, the other person's are here, versus saying mutual inside would be more like a half guard or an inside De La Riva type situation. So we're moving side to side to each other. And so that side to side passing is interesting because it moves myself away from this inside versus outside style of game where, people were playing both feet on the outside. So let's say, whether people are looking for berimbolos or they're looking to go for a scoop De La Riva and start attacking, like a K guard. So it moves away from that because like I'm not with inside their legs. But it also moves away from this idea of someone playing an inside positioning game looking to enter into leg entanglement. So I think like a Toriando passing is really, really interesting in that regard because it's almost an anti-jiu-jitsu type position.
Right, because you're able to get both of their legs outside of that.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think and so people identify as well that that's really, really good for avoiding both the berimbolo and the leg lock game because people play that. But I think like it's worth looking at that in a broader sense because I also look at that position from say double-seated situations, like moving both my feet to the outside, playing that mutual outside positioning. And even when people are passing, like so if I want to go against someone that's got really, really good leg locks from top position, I'll play to that. And so like you'll see like both the Meows and like guys like Jason Rao, they'll play that and like specifically, I think the Henzo Gracie guys call it a side guard. If you talk to like someone like Christian Emerger,
So side guard, you see where there's no inside position of the legs. The knee is pulled up, and most of the time the guy is trying to get into side control, but they can't because your legs are away. Yep, that's exactly how I learned it as.
Yeah, exactly. So side guard is basically the bottom player's variation of playing from that mutual outside positioning. And so that's where that fits into it in a broader sense of positioning. And so side guard would be a way that you could play if you know that the person likes to take inside position from top and to go into leg locks from there. Like Jason Rao, someone that likes to play from inside positioning from like top position to attack the legs.
Like a back step almost into
back steps, and also even sitting straight into like an ashigarami from there, or like pummeling straight to a diagonal ashi, like whatever leg lock options you have from an inside position, like that's what they'd be looking for, whether it's top or bottom. And so I think like playing to that mutual outside, whether it's top or bottom position as a guard player or as a guard passer, is an example of like almost an anti-jiu-jitsu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting how there's like kind of like three ways you can approach like the leg lock, or we'll call it like someone who's actually threatening of the legs. It seems like you can try to pass their legs, just get past them in like a speedy way, like a Toriando. Or if you want to almost play to their game, and I think you'll see this among people who are leg lock savvy themselves, they'll step in and they'll be like, okay, let's play this game. And then that's when you see a lot, I feel like, a lot of float passing.
Sure, absolutely.
Maybe like they could start to sink into some pressure passing as well. But I think you see a
Yeah,
lot of flow passing and a lot of like counter leg locks as well. You'll see from some.
absolutely.
And then
Yeah.
I think you just have some people who don't even want to play that game at all, and then you start seeing them a little bit more low with their legs back and they're more on their knee
Yeah.
looking for like a body lock.
Absolutely. And so that's where like when we're talking about like different approaches to jiu-jitsu as well, that's where I've started, me personally, starting to break up how I observe what's going on in those exchanges. So like if we're talking sub only, like people talk about this all the time, like where top and bottom position don't matter as much. They certainly matter, but and that's where I've started to look more at like exactly that, those four states of positioning that I just mentioned, where we have inside versus outside, but also mutual inside and mutual outside. And so looking more at that with a sub only, like a sub only sort of lens,
Is
where
that something that you're more into? Is the sub only scene rather than points?
um, one of the things I like about jiu-jitsu is the fact that there are so many different rule sets. I actually like having the different rule sets. I like sub only as like because it sort of breaks the conventional rules of jiu-jitsu, and I like nerding out on techniques for that are different to things that you know like wouldn't be there in conventional jiu-jitsu. Like I just like it in terms of just like it's just interesting to me to like just change up what I'm doing. So for example, like a technique that I find really really interesting that's unique to sub only is like I mean it depends on people's relative skill sets, but let's say like the lighter weight divisions, like which position do you think is more threatening in the lighter weight divisions, like mount or close guard?
Man, arguably closed guard can be very threatening, right?
Exactly. It changes with the different weight divisions. Like I would say the heavier weight divisions, mount is more threatening than the close guard, but I'd
Yeah.
certainly say the lighter weight divisions, close guard's more threatening. So one option then in the lighter weight divisions for a sub only match is if someone places you in a close guard, roll into bottom of mount.
Because
So
then
like that's
you're escaping what would be considered more dangerous. You actually see a lot of people playing fairly well from the bottom of the mount, where they can
in a
use
in
that
a
as a
sub only
counter
match.
into the legs.
Yeah, absolutely, exactly. So that's where I think sub only gets really interesting because now we're not thinking like now we can start like breaking those conventional trends where if it's say even MMA or self defense, let's say, which is where the point system comes from because of strikes. You'd be better off being close guard than mount. But like if we're talking sub only and it's one of the lighter weight divisions, like you're like roll to bottom of mount and start attacking from there. And so
That's
this
very
is where I
interesting.
think, thank you. And that's where I think like sub only gets really, really interesting because now you can start thinking more about things like that. And
Because
so
you're
that's
no
like
longer,
just like
like, oh, I can't get past. Like, I can't let anything pass me. Versus, like,
or,
okay, yeah.
exactly. Or think of it. Or another great example I think for sub only is and this is something that I drew. It marries up a few different ideas that I have about jiu-jitsu. So I found that sometimes the best leg entries I get in jiu-jitsu where the person is as like close as possible to me, they're quite close with their hips, is when I'm recovering from a side control because the person's actively trying to keep their hips and shoulders tight to you because they're trying to retain their side control. And for
Yes.
me, that's amounted to being some of the tightest leg lock entries I can get, where like they're really quite close to me. And same with like their upper body. Like you'll look at like something that Krishnamurti shows is like an elbow C armbar, and so like you can like set that up from a side guard. And side guard's a position that you end up in from a side control a lot of the time as you're starting to recover your frames.
Mm-hmm.
And
Especially if
then
the
as well
person's
as
very, like, adamant about staying pressure towards you.
absolutely sure. So there's a few things going on here, and I'll tie it up in just a second. Is an observation. So those are observations I've made in my own jiu-jitsu, and then observing someone like a Jason Rao or a Matthew Tesla is you'll see in like their matches is particularly for Matt Tesla in the 80cc rule set in the no points period is at a certain point he lets people pass his guard to a side control, and then off bottom side control he uses that to set up some submission attempts as he's recovering his guard. And so now, like, this is where I find sub only really interesting, because one of the things I've been playing around with is this idea of, just to tie this all together, is using my guard retention and my recovery from side control in a sub only rule set to set up really, really deep submission attempts. And so developing a specific skill set around that. And that's something that I think would be almost a waste of time to work on when you're talking purely a points rule set, but it's something that's totally legitimate for sub only, because this is something that Gordon Ryan's talked about, is as he's attempting to pass people's guard, one of the things he's looking for is limb extension. And so limb extension is what leads into submission attempts. Now, if it's a sub-only match, you don't want to be extending your limbs to defend a guard pass, because when it's a sub-only match, you know, like you prioritize not getting submitted. Now, you should be prioritizing that for a points match. But when it comes to, say, a sub-only match, it's not even a question of extending your limbs to risk getting submitted, because like you don't lose much by getting your guard pass.
Yeah, especially in a no-gi setting too.
Exactly. So I think you're more likely then to see someone get their guard pass in a sub-only match. And also, it's not as threatening and not as dangerous, because when someone passes your guard in a points match, now you've really got to start opening up to recover, because and also you've got to start opening up to gain some ground back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's up to you too. It's up to the bottom person. The top person kind of has that, I got some points.
Absolutely. And so you're more likely then, I think, to see someone have their guard passed in a sub-only match for that reason. And so that means you're more likely to spend time underneath side control, I think, in a sub-only match, in which case it is worthwhile developing like the submission-based side control recoveries, where you can be threatening from those bottom positions and start to exploit the fact that the person who's on top is trying to keep their shoulders and their hips tight to you as you recover your guard. And so that's where I think those things start to get really, really interesting.
So now you're a brown belt. You know, I'm sure you have some goals that you want to accomplish. So now 2 questions, and then we could start kind of like wrapping up here.
Sure.
What has been some recent, if any, competitions that you found to be quite rewarding, and what do you have coming up?
Sure. So I haven't competed since about January, just because of the state of things in Australia. Australia is a relatively, like, even though large landmass, our population is quite small. Like, we've only got a select few number of major cities, and so there's not a lot of people for me to compete against in Australia at this stage. I feel like, I mean, there's plenty of people I could probably just have matches against. There's not many people that I want to have matches against in Australia right now, either because I've fought them before, or because they're not at a notoriety where I'm particularly interested. And maybe that's a bit up myself to say that. That's just how I feel about it personally.
I think you reach a certain point, eventually you want to be rewarded for your efforts. You want to go against somebody who might have a name, because then that could potentially help you.
Like every match, there is a risk of losing. And there's matches where I think, well, there's not really an upside to this. Like the experience is good, but like I personally feel like it's not going to be that much of a competitive match. As well as, like, if I, presumably if I win, there's not a lot to gain. But losing that match, is always a possibility. You can always lose a match. Like, no matter, losing is, win is, there's never a case where, a win is a guarantee. And so in that case, it's a situation where there's not much to gain and a lot to lose. And it's just, for me, it's it doesn't interest me to take matches where, I've got to put all this effort into something where it's I'm not going to gain much. But there's certainly people in Australia I'd like to have matches against. But yeah, sorry, I was just saying, so I haven't competed for quite a while now, just because within Australia there's not too many matches to be made, and because there's no overseas travel for us at the moment.
Right.
Yeah, so one match I'm really, really looking forward to putting together is against Ash Williams. That's a match him and I have been trying to put together for a little while. Just haven't managed to make that work just yet. But that's so Ash Williams, he just beat Tom Halpin on Polaris, and just became the triple triple belt holder, I believe, for Polaris. So that's a match I really, really would like to have. And so there's quite a few matches I'd like to make in the UK. There's I think he's either Polish or Norwegian. And Mateus, someone that people are saying would be an interesting match. I'm not particularly familiar with him, but that sounds like an interesting match, as well as a match against Tariq Hopstock, famous for the Tarico Plata. So I'd be really, really interested in a match against him. As well as at one stage, we were talking about a match potentially against Jeremiah Vance. I don't know if that ever got put towards him, but so he's a 10th planet brown belt, I believe, from the US. So that would be an interesting match. But that said, I don't know if they've ever put that offer to him, but I'd be interested in that match. A match that I'd be really interested in as well, and I called him out at the last Polaris that I was on, was Ross Nichols.
Nice.
So that's a match I'm really, really interested in. I don't believe Ross is really doing any super fights now at the moment, but I really would like that match, and I think it'd be really, really interesting. I think Ross and I have comparable styles, but we do things still very, very differently. As well as Ross had a match against my coach Lachlan on Grapple Fest. But I'd really like to make that match for Polaris. I know they put that offer to him, but I just don't think he's interested in super fights at the moment, which is fair enough. Ross has gone to ADCC and has a lot of accolades that I don't have, so I totally respect his him denying that match. If it just doesn't interest him. Yeah.
You have some other guys there that are definitely going to be I feel like the next step for you.
Yeah.
As you start to get those, exactly. Those are some pretty respected names. So I guess that's kind of the next level then would be to go for those respected brown belts that you start getting into that black belt level.
And as well as a match that we've been trying to put together, and he's really, really interested in as well, and so am I. And again, similar thing, trying to just make dates for it is a match against Keith Krikorian. So that's a match that I'd really. Yeah, so he's really, really keen on that. We've talked about that a few times, and as well as Keith and I get along really well. So that's just a match that I think both of us would be if we could take a step back, it's a match that both of us would be excited to watch as fans, and it's something that I think both of us would just be really, really interested in doing. And then I'd love to train with Keith afterwards as well. He's a really, really awesome guy with an interesting approach to jiu-jitsu.
And you see him, obviously, something's working. He's been on the up and coming for a little bit now.
Oh, for sure.
Nice Keith is someone.
And Keith is someone as well that is so good, and I feel doesn't have the level of appreciation he deserves for it. The balls on that guy to jump in as a 66-kilo competitor, jump into the open weight division of the ADCC and go against Buchecha first round. That's crazy. Who does that?
Crazy people.
Keith is just someone that I have so much respect for, and is just an incredible competitor, and I think deserves a bit more.
That's right. That's awesome, man. Those are some great goals. The whole reflection, it's been quite interesting to hear back on the progression, right? I'm sure it must be a little nuts for you too to kind of reflect on. Is this something that you regularly reflect on, or?
I try to, as much as I can, look at my own process, because I see one of the observations I see about people that are trying to be effective coaches is they try and get them to do things that they didn't actually use to get good. Now, that doesn't mean that the things they're trying to implement don't work, but it's just you want all of this to be backed up by some amount of data. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things that are anecdotal, because you want to look at what's not just working for you, but what's worked consistently for other people. So I try and reflect what worked for me, and I go, okay, did that work for me? Does that work for other people as well? And so I try and look at those sort of things, and I try and work out okay, did I just happen to do that and it helped me, or is that actually probably an effective thing to include in the process?
That's the coolest thing, when you can start to share the techniques, and over the next few weeks you start to see the effectiveness of it. Just something interesting as I started to I would say, as I progress more in my jiu-jitsu, there are certain people that will actually ask me for advice, which I think is really cool. And when I was first coming up like as a white belt, I saw a lot of success with this like triangle setup that I would do, where it was like a push pull of the hands, where I would like push one hand in, or I'd like fake the push the other side in, and it was just like this little simple trick that always like kept working for me. And I showed a few people who are like, oh, it's like their first 3 months of training, and then they come up to me like the following week, and they're like, yo, I hit that triangle like a bunch of times, and that's like the best feeling ever, because you know, like at least to some degree that like you're teaching something that's actually like productive, and I don't know, it's just an overall good feeling. Do you have any? Okay, go on.
I was going to say, it's funny you mentioned that triangle setup. Like I was teaching that to a white belt recently that just started jiu-jitsu, or at least a variation of it from like Z-guard and close guard, and like exactly that. Like back the next week, he's like, man, like I just locked that up on so many different people. He's like, I'm having this problem with it. Let's work on that. And like it's like really awesome to see week to week like him coming back and like finding success and like being able to come at me with like new problems that he's having. But I just thought it was funny because it sounds like it's probably like a very similar triangle setup.
Well, if the fact that you're teaching that move and I just taught that move, that makes me feel good. That makes me feel better that like I'm teaching, like I want to, I always want to show like legitimate stuff. That's the best thing. But I feel like it's just such a simple little trick, right? Where you just push and pull, or you do the opposite way, and it can lead to a drastic change of the entire thing. It doesn't take a lot of like, we've all done the setups where you have the overhook and then you try to turn your body to break their posture down, and you got to grab this way and this way, right? Versus I think sometimes it can be effective for the brand new people to just be like, yo, just do this. Just do this one thing and you can get in there. Yeah. Very cool.
Sorry, as you were saying. You were saying something about reflection before that, and I think I interrupted you.
Yeah, so I was also going to ask if you have any goals as far as like coaching or instructing goes. Do you have anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So my focus right now, particularly with a lot of like this COVID situation going on, like I've spent a lot more time focusing on coaching. Like just recently, I just went over to another city to coach one of my students at a competition, and also just like do some training with him, like leading up to his match before and after. So that was my student Brody Greco. And so for me, like I've been really focusing on coaching and trying to like just have like a positive influence on people's jiu-jitsu. And like say with the example of Brody, like he's been doing absolutely fantastic. Like, and one of the things that him and I have been working on recently is trying to impart not just the techniques, but also that learning process, like trying to get him to like see, like, like show him like how I study jiu-jitsu so he can do the same thing. And so it's like, and that's something that we've worked on over time with that. And like, for like he now, like, he's been now for a long time, like similar to me, having like a notebook of like things that he's working on that he takes with him to training every day. And like now we're working through that process of like, how do we start studying jiu-jitsu matches? And like, we worked on something recently, like an arm triangle variation. And then I gave him a couple of matches of Gordon Ryan's matches. And I said to him, okay, study this and like try and start comparing like what Gordon does in these different matches with his arm triangle, and like getting him to like do more of that. And so he's spending a lot of time now, experimenting with different things in jiu-jitsu, and also trying to study jiu-jitsu more and trying to bring that into his training. And he's doing a fantastic job with like, not just taking the things that I teach him directly, but also trying to really steer his own training. So, and that's where I'm trying to go with my own coaching, is not just to give people techniques. It's, like trying to give people the tools to find their own success.
Almost like show them how to learn jiu-jitsu.
Exactly, like they say. Like you can fish for someone, or you can teach them how to fish.
Right, you want to teach people how to fish. I've seen some people that they train for years and they're really just kind of focused on like doing the techniques in class, and then they do the live rounds, and that's kind of like it as far as like their training goes. And it's absolutely insane how the people that take the time to like study, write down the notes, look at the matches, just how much faster they get better. That is so, I think for anybody who like even listens into this who doesn't do that needs to start doing that. It's
absolutely,
that's something that Rob really like struck home with me. A big thing actually, and so I'll just tell you this because it's quite funny. We were training at the first academy that I was ever at, and there was just one guy who was just like heel hooking everybody in the gym like constantly, and I was like, "What is he doing?" And it was Rob, right? So I started like learning from him, and I remember like he heel hooked me like 10 times in like a 5 minute round, and he was like, "Hey, you should come to like this group private with me." It was so cool because I started seeing like this little group of like savages that were learning leg locks, and they were like everyone was like white belts too, which added it was definitely like a lot of fun doing that. But it was the main thing that I really took home from his coaching was him telling me like he would like I remember we did like a 4 hour seminar once, and then for another 4 hours he was just on the computer. We were just watching matches, and he was just analyzing it. Like, this is the stuff that you want to look for. This is the stuff that you want to look for, and it's
Absolutely.
like that changes. That is, I know we've talked a
Yeah.
lot about game changers, but that is super important if you really want to take jiu-jitsu seriously, I believe.
Yeah, like I follow Rob, like, and I watch like a lot of his material that he puts out. Like, I like for that very reason. Like, it's just good to see different people's approaches to jiu-jitsu that is like different to my own. And I think like Rob and I, generally speaking, have like a similar approach, but it's just good to see how he does it like a bit differently to me. And like, yeah, like, but then it's also good to have like affirmation and like the commonalities with like people that are also finding success in jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, so you know you're on the right path. Well, and what weight class are you in?
So I walk around about like 74, 73 kilos right now, which is a little bit like that's probably like 160.
Yeah.
And then depending on the match, I cut down to about 145.
Okay. That's definitely in the more okay, that's still in like the light division. Do you do any sort of like any sort of strength and conditioning work or anything focused on nutrition to help you with
So
jiu-jitsu?
I definitely focus like I'm very aware of my nutrition, like in terms of like making sure like supplement everything properly. Like I'm a vegetarian, so making sure I'm like supplementing like magnesium, iron, vitamin C, things like that, and making sure that when I'm cooking, like really trying to combine foods together properly to make sure like I'm absorbing like the right sort of like like vitamins, minerals, nutrients, things like that. As well as like making sure I'm having like enough like protein and like having like creatine and things like that. Um, yeah, so like I try and have like a decent handle on my diet. With the COVID stuff, I've been a little bit of a nomad lately, so my diet's been like fairly sort of like all over the place, like not particularly consistent and probably not as healthy as I would prefer. But in terms of the strength and conditioning side of things, like right now, I pretty much just do jiu-jitsu. I want to start like I've started to take a step back in terms of like how much I'm like rolling hard each day, just because like accumulation of injuries over the years. And like I'm going to be introducing some like strength and conditioning now, just for like probably like joint stability, and just like helping with like injury prevention and things like that. As well as like now I'm doing more. I'm starting to do like different sort of exercise outside of jiu-jitsu now, like some bouldering and some tennis.
Nice.
Yeah.
Those are always fun. I think it
Yeah.
gives you a nice like little mental break where you still push your
Yeah,
body.
absolutely.
I started.
Oh, as well as I just got like this whoop strap thing to
I was
start
actually
like
about to ask
monitoring
about.
my
I was
sleep.
about to ask about that. I have mine right here. It's the bicep one.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, like exactly that, like trying to get a better handle in terms of like, okay, like what's my exertion day to day, as well as like how well I'm sleeping. For me, one of the big things for a long time is like making sure I'm getting like a healthy amount of sleep each night.
That's the whoop really yells at you when you don't get the enough sleep.
Exactly, and that's what I want. Like, and I want to make sure that I'm like tracking that, because like I certainly get like 8 hours of sleep like most nights. And like before I moved to Melbourne and like training there with like all those guys at Absolute, like my sleep pattern was really not great. When I moved to Melbourne, like I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to be training properly, I need to make sure I'm sleeping properly. So I've been pretty consistent in getting 8 hours of sleep, but now just trying to do more, where I make sure I'm getting like a good amount of like REM sleep, and making sure that like I'm like not trying to absorb too much blue light and things like that before I go to sleep. Not too many disturbances in my sleep. making sure I'm trying to sort of like wake up at like the right sort of stage in my sleep cycle. So
Yeah.
trying to use more like those like alarms that wake you up when they're starting to detect more movement in your sleep, as opposed to waking up right in the middle of REM sleep where you wake up feeling really groggy.
Yeah. When you finish all the cycles, you feel so different. You feel like alive in the morning.
For
You're like
sure.
ready to get the day going versus when you still have like that groggy feeling. And yeah, exactly. As an athlete, you have to put your time and effort into those things, like the recovery side of it, the things that aren't as like I guess sexy and fun,
Exactly.
Where I'm trying to like give my knowledge and service to the jiu-jitsu community is in that strength and conditioning realm. Because I started off before doing jiu-jitsu, I was a personal trainer, and then I was personal training while I was training jiu-jitsu, and I started getting this feeling that I need to like coach jiu-jitsu. That was like I felt like was a very big feeling for me. Now, I don't think I'm skilled enough yet to do that. I think one day I will be, but where I feel like I can give value is in that strength conditioning. Because I've seen like just some of my clients that do jujitsu, when they start incorporating like things like how you kind of say, where the emphasis is on injury prevention and like lowering that risk and just being a little bit stronger, a little bit more conditioned, how there's a drastic improvement, especially in the competition side of things, right? Maybe not in the live training, but like I think when you have that natural pressure of being in competition, I think that when you're doing strength and conditioning, what's great about it is that you're actually pushing your body's physical limits, and you don't have to necessarily think for that. So if you're trying to get stronger, you're trying to work, let's say like intense rounds of battle ropes, you don't have to think about where you're placing your hand. Like you just have to do it. You just have to kind of like tough it out and do it. So when I feel that the carryover then is when you get into like those deep, intense rounds, like it's a 10-minute match, you're 7.5 minutes in against like a very tough, well-developed opponent. That's where it's really gonna matter and affect. So I'm very interested to hear how you continue onwards with that, if you get started in that, and to see the aftermath of a more jacked and conditioned version of Jeremy Scaring. Yeah, it's cool. But anyway, man, I definitely have to like wrap it up here soon. I was not expecting it to go this long, but I'm glad it did. I think I like got another belt. I think I'm like gonna go to purple belt next. I think I'm just gonna skip blue because of
I'll send it to you in the mail.
Yeah. I'll just not. I think people are just promoting themselves nowadays, so I'll just do that.
We'll have to do a Zoom ceremony.
Yeah. Can we get Lachlan in on it too? Will he be down?
We might be able to.
He might like the joke.
I'll send it his way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Send them a note. But yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on. I think this was really cool to be able to explore that journey. For anybody that's listening, if they want to connect to you a little bit more, they want to like watch some of your matches or whatever the case may be, what's the easiest way for people to like get connected to you?
Awesome. So people can always reach me on Instagram. That's probably the place where I'm a bit more active. As well as like I've got a YouTube channel. I'm going to be starting to put some things on it probably relatively soon. As well as like if you want to see some of my matches, like they're up on Flow Grappling as well. Yeah, but so in terms of reaching out to me, Instagram is probably the best way to go. And you can get me on there, Jeremy Paul Skinner.
Nice. Awesome stuff. All right, man. I'm going to end it here. Thanks again. Appreciate you.
Awesome.
Any final words? Yeah, no worries.
Just shout out to my sponsors, both Scramble and Barefoot. So as well as, yeah, thank you for having me on.
Hell yeah. Awesome. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you being here, you can definitely talk about your sponsors. That's who's helping you fund your journey.
Yeah.
So that's important. All right, I'm gonna end it here.